Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 81. Today I'm talking with Alex Pomerantz from Subject to Change Wines and David Rothschild of Las Vivas. Two great projects. We discuss how the natural wine movement has changed since Alex started, some of David's farming practices, making and farming natural wines at scale and those economies of scale, what Alex has planned for the future of Subject to Change, through other businesses like Alex's Bar Gemini and Gemini Bottle Shop, and David's Los Paisanos Vineyard Management, and much more. A reminder that I have a Patreon at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast. The link is in the show notes also. If you're enjoying the podcast, any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. It's all run independent and out of pocket. Telling a friend or sharing on social media are great ways to help out too. Here we go. I don't know, you start at the beginning. How'd you guys meet?
We met at Raw Wine LA.
2019, I think.
Yeah. 19, 18?
18 or 19.
Yeah. When David was working with Dan Marioni at Sonoma Mountain Winery. And Dan and I had become friends through hanging out at Ruby Wine. Dan was working there for a while. I used to spend most evenings there for a nice 8-year stretch of my life, and yeah, that's how I met.
Nice.
I had pretty recently started Subject to Change, and David had recently started working with Dan at Sonoma Mountain Winery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you grew up in Sonoma. Did you have any connection with the wine industry, growing up, or
Not exactly. Neither of my parents worked in the wine industry. My dad was an attorney. My mom owned a shop on the Sonoma Plaza. There was a wine bar in her shop. First it was Buena Vista, then it was Mayo, then it was Highway 12.
Okay.
Neither of my parents were particularly into wine. I honestly think that most locals I grew up with in Sonoma weren't particularly into wine growing up. My real initial exposure to grape growing and wine in Sonoma Valley was because I grew up with the Couturis.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with Phil's kids.
Right.
And met Nick and Tony, a couple times when I was younger, but was more Phil's side than Tony's side.
Okay. So you, it was more just wine adjacent then, I guess, it was just friends.
You can't not be wine adjacent growing up in the Valley.
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
So you just started Subject to Change, Alex? When you guys met?
When we met, yeah, I had pretty recently started Subject to Change. I think we had we started Subject to Change in 2017, so we were either showing our first or second releases at that Raw in LA when we met. But yeah, before starting Subject to Change, I worked at a winery in Sonoma called Kibblestad Cellars for 7 years before that. But we didn't really know each other back then.
Yeah. What was the idea, your impetus for starting Subject to Change? What kind of wines did you want to make, or what were your kind of thought process?
Yeah, I mean, it feels weird to say this because there were really early pioneers of natural wine in California, but there was just, I was I mentioned, I was hanging out at Ruby Wine all the time. That's when I really got hooked into the deep world of natural wine, I would say. I had been interested in wine and food as an enthusiast for a really long time before I ever worked in it professionally, but I really started working in it professionally pretty quickly out of college. By the time I was a year out of college, I was out here working in it. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to college in New York, and a year later I was out here in the Bay Area looking for wine production jobs and just hoping to cut my teeth in wine production and start to make my way into the industry. But yeah, and I was always attracted to smaller production and kind of a more human scale operation and the types of wines that were produced in those environments. But after spending 7 years at Kivelstadt, after spending so much time hanging out at Ruby, starting to realize, I've sort of said this a lot of times, and so now it sounds cliche when I say it, but it's like I noticed, especially sort of this group of friends that formed around natural wine, hanging out at Ruby. We would have dinners together a lot. Everything was like local beef, local produce, imported wine. And I'm like, that doesn't really, it's kind of like incongruent in this weird way where it's like, well, we live in this place where everything grows beautifully. Obviously, it's a place where you can grow world-class grapes and make world-class wine. And yet the culture here around natural wine really exists around imported wine, which I think you could say for a lot of places in the New World. Like Australia obviously went through its own whole renaissance around natural wine. But yeah, I just sort of thought like, there just doesn't seem to be that much of this going on here. Obviously, there were some people making it, but it just seemed like the time was kind of pretty like fertile ground to get something off the ground like this. I'd had like the relationships for sales through my previous position with Kivelstadt. I had the relationships with growers, and I sort of just like had the foundation to get it off the ground.
Mm-hmm. You kind of came to wine through the other way, right, Dave? Like farming side.
Yeah, totally. So, I just spoke to it a little bit, but I didn't really grow up. I grew up in an agriculturally adjacent place, but I didn't grow up with an ag background at all. I was at college at UC Santa Cruz and got super inspired by environmental sustainability. Was going through the environmental studies program there and really got inspired by organic farming and the essentially the impact that growing organic food can, and the outcomes that it can produce for creating a more sustainable world. I started initially out of college growing produce in the Central Valley. And then I was between jobs when, my friend's dad, Phil Katuri, found out that I was unemployed and told me that I had to come work for him, which is how I got into vineyard management. I worked for Phil for a couple years. And then
have to come work for me.
He told me if I hadn't found a job by the beginning of the year, I had to go work for him. And I said, I don't want to work for you. I'm going to find a job. I honestly, growing up in the Valley, personally, and I feel like a lot of my friends were really off-put by wine culture. We thought it was for wealthy people and people who were pretentious, and didn't really feel like it was something for us. It was something that was more for tourists. So I had no interest in wine, viticulture, any of that. I found, I was kind of inspired by like more of the community aspect of organic farming, and I didn't know that existed within both viticulture and winemaking, which was something that I discovered much later.
What were you concentrating on when you were in the Central Valley? Were there certain crops or
just mixed
of everything?
Mixed produce. I did an apprenticeship at a nonprofit farm just outside of downtown Sacramento called Soilborn Farm. And then when I went back there, I worked for one of the bigger organic vegetable growers in Northern California called Terra Firma. At the time, they had like a 1,000 member CSA that delivered all throughout the Bay Area. Farmed 250 acres of organic produce. And, that's a good segue into the fact that I've always been interested in how to, in the economy of scale. And I don't really ever want to be like a huge, large scale grower, but I really do like studying larger systems to figure out how the big boys can do it efficiently and try and glean some of those techniques and apply them into my own production, and to also try and see if they can be modified to fit within organic agriculture.
Have you found anything that really kind of changed the way you farm in a large way, or or that you make you look at it differently?
Tractors.
Okay.
I'm kind of a geek about machinery. When I was in college, I was I was avid cyclist. I wanted to run a bicycle powered farm.
Okay.
And after starting, to work both in vegetables and in viticulture, I kind of realized how impractical that was and how much work a tractor can do. So mechanization is one of them, but just really just looking at efficiencies. That being said, I do really high touch, like human touch, organic farming in the vineyards. And it's not efficient necessarily. We touch every vine minimum 6 times, 6, 8, 10 times a year by hand, and there's usually about 1,000 vines per acre. I farm about 60 acres of grapes, do the math.
Yeah.
But those are also things that I think that there's value in it. So I don't want to compromise on the quality.
Alex, you kind of played around with like that economy of scale. It seems like a little bit with winemaking. I guess probably making more than the average natural wine producer here in the Bay Area.
No doubt.
and doing it for a couple different like I guess like the Flower and Water Group and a couple different
private label clients.
Yeah. How did you kind of come to that side of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one thing in the early days of natural wine, I think a lot of people would laugh at me for even calling like 2012-ish when I really got into really serious, like hardcore natural wine in the early days. But really before that, it was just really very few wine bars and shops, maybe here, certainly in New York, maybe a few scattered elsewhere throughout the country. But it's funny to think back because that's not, I guess it's 13 years is a pretty long time, but now it's like so prolific that, every city in middle America has like multiple places where you can buy really high quality natural wine where people are knowledgeable and enthusiastic. And a lot of that's obviously like the internet and sort of proliferation of like importing and distribution and all of these, just the whole sort of like industry just getting like connected and growing around it, and so many amazing producers. And a lot of that is just because there's a market for it, right? Like, I don't think that this is a unique moment where it's just like, oh, all of a sudden all these people just decided that they would love to have a career making natural wine. I think it's just like was really the first time where people thought, oh, I actually could maybe have a career, or enough more people thought like I could actually make this a career, right? And so I think, I'm talking about producers, importers, shopkeepers, wine bars, restaurateurs, etc. And so it's been really cool to see the industry grow so quickly around. Obviously, there's been a lot of issues with that as well, but the whole industry sort of like grow around the expanded interest in it. But yeah, I think for me, a lot of it was about like, all right, we're drinking these really cool wines from these really cool producers. You can buy it at a few really niche wine shops, a few really niche wine bars or restaurant programs. The wines are made in tiny quantities, and part of that is what makes it super special and super exciting. But of course, like, I was thinking, all right, well, how do we offer this to more people? How does somebody in Columbus, Ohio have this experience, right? Like, what are the things that need to be done to connect like this really cool special niche product that somebody's willing to import to a city like New York or a city like San Francisco, because there's a few cavistes that are interested in this stuff who have like a really niche clientele who will sell it to, all right, now they're like 5 to 10 places to buy wine in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know why I'm picking that place, probably because we sell a lot of wine there. Shout out Voyager Beverage. But yeah, I think like my thought was, all right, how do we get this to more people? We live in a place where it is scalable, right? We have access to unlimited quantities of high quality organic grapes.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing, was when I started helping source fruit for some of the Kittelstat programs for the stuff that wasn't estate grown. I was going up to Mendocino County in like 2011, 12, 13, got hooked up mostly through Aaron at Ruby, actually, because he grew up in Redwood Valley with some growers up there. And I was like, oh my God, this is so high quality and it's so inexpensive, especially relative to Napa and Sonoma. But you can really afford to make a very affordable bottle of wine with this stuff. And, like we were doing that at Kittelstat. And I'm like, all right, why can't we apply this to, wine that's made with no SO2, only native yeast, no filtration, etc. And so the obvious answer was, okay, we can. So we started with 40 tons in our first vintage, but our eye was always on how can we scale this? How much can we scale this? What are the downsides of scaling it? Obviously, we knew what the upsides of scaling it are. Some of it is economies of scale. Some of it is being able to offer the wines at a really affordable price. Some of it is being able to offer the wines and to stay in stock so that you can have B2B clients that are bigger, right? Mm-hmm. It's you can't go to Whole Foods and say, hey, we can get you 3 cases of this for your 300 stores in the country. They're going to be like, what the fuck do we do with that? Right. But if you're like, hey, we can make you 1,000 cases of this or 2,000 cases of this, and you now have the opportunity to reach this market. And so people who shop at Whole Foods who like natural wine can buy something, and Whole Foods also can, they're obviously efficient with the way they do business. And so you can reach a broader audience. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, it was also important to me to be able to build a system where an ecosystem where people can actually have a career in this, right? Because before it was kind of guys like David, who grew up in Sonoma, who had a buddy who had a winery, who he could go work with that guy. They could work in natural wine, or somebody who it's you kind of know people, or you fall into it, or you pursue it on the side as a hobby. Maybe you keep a second, a day job, and you do it on the side. But really, that's not an industry, right? It's industries are places where there are job listings, and people can look at the job listings and then be like, ooh, I could have that skill. I have that skill set. Let me go apply for this job and interview and see if I can get it. And then learn new skills and apply them elsewhere and take them to another company within that industry. And that just didn't exist that much within natural wine. It was just so small. I mean, especially back in 2012, right? But even in 2017, it was really starting to grow, but it was still pretty I feel I could basically name every single natural wine producer in California when we started. And now I couldn't even attempt that, Yeah. I mean, there are so many that I'm not aware of, and that's great, right? I mean, there's obviously an oversupply of wine globally right now, so that's challenging for all those people, myself included. But it worked, right? The idea was, how do we build an industry that people can have careers in? And it worked. It's everywhere. There are so many places that sell so much amazing natural wine. There's more access to amazing natural wine than ever. There are more people making it. There are more people growing the grapes for it. There are more people with the bars, the restaurants, the shops, etc. So I think it's pretty cool.
Should we taste one of these natural wines?
Let's do it.
I don't think I even knew what natural wine was in 2012.
No. Only in France, where the real natural wine is made.
I worked on a documentary in 2011. It was early in California. it was Tony in there.
What was it called again?
It was called Wine from Here.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. It was Tony. It was Chris Brockway.
You were involved in that?
I just did the audio.
That's awesome.
I think there were about a dozen people.
Yeah, I remember seeing Derek Trowbridge, Gideon, Brockway. Maybe Donkey and Goat was involved.
King Goat. I mean, it had Paul Draper from Ridge and Steve Edmonds.
Yeah.
Man, I'm spacing on his name right now. He was doing really cool stuff at the time. Natural Process Alliance.
Oh, Kevin Kelly.
Kevin Kelly.
Dude, hell yeah. Those wines
Yeah,
were
Kevin
fucking
was
crazy.
in it. Hank Locklorine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
There you go. That's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, no offense to anybody who was left off that list who was making natural wine at that time, but it's like probably literally a handful of other people, right?
Yeah, maybe there were like 3 others or
Yeah.
5 others, but
I mean, no offense to any of those people we just named, but like they're also the elder statesmen of the industry. Most everybody else that makes natural wine is we're Alex and I are in our mid-30s. Almost everyone else is our age. Those are the people that got started who are at least 10 years older than us, if not older.
Yeah, I mean, that's not offensive to those people. I think it's also
I'm just not trying to call them old.
I don't think
They're just older than
age
us.
is just a number, man. I mean, in a way, I'm also like jealous of those people now that there's this downturn, because I think that a lot of them already saw a downturn and they're like, oh, we know how to handle downturns. And we're like, oh, fuck, this is like our first. I mean, the last downturn, we were in college, All right, let's talk about the actual wine instead of economic downturns. It's a lot more fun.
So we're drinking 2022 Minish Chardonnay from Sonoma Mountain, which is a plot that I farm. All the wines that I make with my Las Vivas brand are grapes I farm myself. So like I said, I run a small vineyard management company. It's comprised of some leases and then also some vineyard management, which is essentially just contract farming. All the wines are made from vineyards that I'm leasing. And that business essentially came out of working with Nick and Dan, and then eventually Dan and myself at Sonoma Mountain Winery, which then segued into Dan Marioni Wines. Just to complete the timeline, I quit working at Terra Firma in 2015, moved to New Orleans for a couple of years, took a break from farming, moved back to Sonoma in 2017, just in time for the big fires. And when I got back, I was spending I went to high school with Dan, and he had just quit working at Tesla and was helping Nick out at Sonoma Mountain Winery, and eventually became Nick's business partner. And I was just doing odd jobs after I got back from New Orleans, mostly construction and landscaping, and was hanging out at the mountain a bunch, helping them do whatever, bottling. I'd help out at harvest, just anything, and definitely partying too. There was plenty of that going on up there, but that was really my first exposure to natural wine, and that's when Dan was also working at Ruby. It's when I started to hang out there and kind of got introduced to everybody, and that was, to me, again, like the two things that I found really inspiring by that experience were, one, that I saw that there was actually like community for young people in wine that wasn't centered around being really wealthy. When I worked for Phil Couturier at Enterprise Vineyards, all the grapes that we farmed typically went into $100+ bottles of wine. And I felt like I was just growing grapes, doing really cool farming, but just growing grapes for rich people. And then I quit working at Terra Firma because I came to the same conclusion that I was just growing organic vegetables for rich people. And I became very disillusioned. And taking a few years off of farming was one of the best decisions I ever made. It eventually led me back to farming because it's the thing that I care about the most. So anyway, I started working with Nick and Dan full time in 2019. And Nick was leasing 5 acres of grapes, and that was one of the main things that I came on to help out with. I did a lot of seller help too, but it was mostly to help him with those leases. And in 2019, it was 5 acres, and then in 20, it was 10. 21, it was 30. 21 it was 45, 22 it was 60, and I've
Yeah.
been just trying to catch up ever since.
Okay.
So this is from a vineyard that I've been leasing since 2020. And it's a steep eastern facing slope on Sonoma Mountain. I'm very partial to Sonoma Mountain. Not only is it where I got started making wine, it's also where I live and farm grapes and have been for over 5 years. I think it's exceptionally beautiful, and I feel
It's
very
really wonderful.
feel blessed to get to spend most of my time up there. So I'm pretty partial to the mountain and to this site because I've been there so long. And I think one of the unique things about this Chardonnay is that because of that steep eastern facing slope in the valley, we're below the fog line. But in mornings when there's not far fog, we get blasted by morning sun. We're in the shade during the hottest part of the day. To me, this wine isn't Burgundy. It's very much distinctly California. It's a more medium climate. But I think because it's, cooler there during the hottest part of the day, it still retains acidity, but also develops, more ripe California fruit flavors.
Pretty refined. It's tasting great.
Yeah, it's one
Yeah.
of the slaps.
Great.
Yeah. We should have tasted these in reverse order.
No, I'm looking forward to tasting this as well.
Well, no, I just mean like the Las Vivas is just like kind of
Big.
rounder and more textural, and the Bang Bang's a little zippier.
This was actually the wine that I tried that when I met Alex, where I was like, that's when I sparked up conversation. I was inspired.
Okay.
I was inspired by not this particular vintage, but
Yeah.
his Chardonnay from that Coast View vineyard in the Gavilan Mountains, which is just east of Monterey. Southeast.
Yeah, well, it's like Eastern Monterey County. Yeah.
I thought the wine was exceptional, and I was really, inspired by the fact that it was a wine that was made without sulfur and was super clean and super. It was just sexy.
Yeah. Chardonnay, for some reason, I feel like California Chardonnay, even though that's like the most overly broad category I could ever imagine, I feel like we've actually had a ton of success making really high quality, clean Chardonnay in ways where we haven't had the same amount of success with other white grapes. Maybe that's just because it's so widely planted, so you sort of have the pick of the litter on site. So I guess that's probably a huge part of it. But yeah, we've had a ton of success with Chardonnay all around in really, really different iterations, different terroirs, different styles of winemaking, from things that are direct pressed to things that are macerated, things that are like lighter, fresher, shorter élevage to longer élevage, more elegant things like the Las Vivas, and kind of everything in between. Chardonnay rips. Chardonnay. It's funny. I've been hearing more people lately. This is completely anecdotal. Say, like, yeah, Chardonnay is my favorite grape. I'm like, whoa,
That's,
it's back.
I mean, like 10 years ago, that would be pretty punk rock.
Very,
Say that.
very.
Or actually, probably just really normie.
Yeah, it's kind of like
It's full circle.
it's full circle, and I think maybe some of this is also just because there's so much really good natural wine coming out of Burgundy now, and there's just more people sort of like highlighting that. Obviously, like Shiraz Chardonnays, I think also play a huge role in like the way that natural wine consumers have been influenced by Chardonnay, but there's also so much sick California Chardonnay being made by natural winemakers now.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's just like it's easy to find high quality fruit in the Chardonnay realm. So I guess versus other white varieties where you may like, if you're like, ooh, if you want to work with this variety, you can only choose from a handful of sites. But we don't really work that way anyway. We sort of work from the site backward. So
I think in the natural wine community, I think it has gone a little bit back, or people at least playing around a little more with Merlot and Pinot and Cab. Even it's not.
hell yeah.
Yeah, it's not all Trousseau.
No,
anymore,
not
or
at
like,
all.
you know.
Not at all. I think that was a very like, I think in the new California moment, the esoteric varieties really became the esoteric varieties and low alcohol really became the things that movement hung its hat on. I don't want to speak out of turn for any winemakers that identify that way, but like I feel like those were really the things that you heard a lot about, was like either you're making, wines that are under 14% alcohol, or even in like if you're making like Pinot, Cab, and Chard, that was this remarkable standout thing about your wines, or you're working with like Gamay, Trousseau, whatever have you, Aliote. And I think there's obviously so much bleed over between like New California natural wine on the Venn diagram. A lot of people fall into both, and whatever, people identify different ways. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to label everything. But I think a lot of the energy inside of the natural wine movement, especially like this wave of the natural wine movement that is currently, let's say, over the last 5 years, is really behind like finding the best farming. And in order to find the best farming, like we've always really sort of reverse engineered from like finding vineyards that we like and people that we like and farming practices that we like, and then just working with what they have out there to back into like what kind of wine we're going to make. And I think that's become more popular, and as a result of the fact that it's just like, yeah, of course, there's like insane amounts of Cab and Pinot and Merlot and Chardonnay planted out there. So if you want to find the best fruit, like odds are a lot of what you're going to be working with are those things. And your wine doesn't have to be like this boring, normal thing because you're working with what I'll call like mainstream varieties. It can be whatever you want it to be, right? And I think that's really cool. And I also think it's a super important thing. I'm sure David would love to talk more about this, to like bridge the gap of the natural wine consumer and the non-natural wine consumer. And like, there's pendulum swings in everything, right? Like we're seeing like these massive political pendulum swings, and we've seen massive pendulum swings in like consumer behavior within the wine market. And like obviously the pendulum swung like really far to the fringe natural wine movement, and we've seen it swing back. But I think a huge part of this moment is like, all right, how do we go to the consumer that may have been like off put by some super strange natural wine that they tasted that they did not connect with, and say, all right, you know what, like this Las Vivas Chardonnay, this is natural wine. Like we don't have to sell it to you as natural wine, but the bottom line is like this wine aligns with every single ideal of the natural wine movement, but it has like a pretty normal looking label on it. It's in a normal package, and it's like pretty clear, like not like filtered wine clear, but it's like, it's not turbid, and it's very varietally correct. And it's like, if you like Chardonnay, you're probably going to love this. Obviously, if you want like the super like fake oak, heavy popcorn flavor, this isn't going to be up your alley. But like, if you think that California Chardonnay rules, you're going to like this wine, whether you're accustomed to drinking wines that are more like commercially made or more classically made or not. This wine fucking rules. And so I think using wines like this, and we're going to taste like a couple other wines that I would consider to be sort of like perfect, not even gateway drug natural wines, but sort of like almost the natural wines that you can reapproach to people that think they don't like natural wine with, right? I think this is kind of the moment for that, to be like, okay, we can all like live in harmony together, and you don't have to be like, I only drink natural wine or I only drink traditional wine. And like those camps just feel, especially because this moment's like super politically charged. I also just been thinking a lot about this kind of stuff where like, all right, well, like how do we bring people together and not just have everybody be like, I'm on this team and I'm on that team, and if you're not on my team, I have to hate you and blah, blah, blah. I think it's super important, and I have to like really applaud. I think there are a lot of particularly restaurant programs and shops that do this really well, where they're not like waving the natural wine flag, but they're also not like waving the like we fucking hate natural wine flag. They're just like, we buy the best wines that we can come into contact with, and some of them lean more traditional and some of them are natural. And if you come in here and you ask for natural wine, we'll know what you're talking about. We'll have something for you. And if you come in here and you're like, I hate natural wine, we'll have like plenty of nice stuff for you as well. I think the pendulum's definitely swinging back that way, but I also think that like coming from definitely like the natural wine camp, which we both are, it's really important to be able to sort of like, I hate this term, but like reach across the aisle and like hook some of those people and let them know like it's not. I think so many people have in their head like natural wine is like this turbid, VA riddled, potentially mousy, crazy thing, and it's not. It's just wine made with a particular philosophy, but that doesn't always have like such specific outcomes on the style of the wine that goes into the bottle necessarily. That was pretty long-winded. Sorry.
You gave me a lot of things to respond to. I don't even know where to start.
Well, I wasn't really asking.
What do you think? Do you think
questions.
kind
I
of the
was just-
varietal, varietal wine, Chardonnay, Pinot? Do you think that gives people an in when it comes to maybe transitioning a consumer to natural wine?
I mean, obviously, no one's going to be like uncomfortable picking this bottle up. It's just like a bottle with a nice label that says Chardonnay on it from a recognizable appellation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, Matt. And before I answer it, I think that Alex really kind of he kind of nailed, describing the moment when we were kind of entering this industry and like that wave of the new California wines was totally peaking. Yeah. And when I first started getting into wine, it was all about any esoteric grape, lesser known regions, lesser known wine producing countries. And that was in. And then in California, like just two, like right off the top of my head, just like Steve Matthiessen or Scott Schultz, who's a buddy of mine with Jolie Lade, Scott still, it's just anything but Pinot, Chardonnay, or Cap. And Steve definitely makes some more traditional wines, but he works with some of the most esoteric grapes. And I think I think when I first started to roll around in natural wine circles, I think that like a lot of my peers in natural wine were also searching for those esoteric grapes. And now I feel like it's kind of come more full circle. Not for everybody, but for some people where they want to work with what's readily available, and are more interested in, like Alex was saying, is farming and or particular regions. So, and for me, I've only been working with existing vineyards in Sonoma Valley. So I work with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, Syrah, Merlot, and Cabernet. I'd love to work with some Zin. Personally, I'm very partial to it, even though it doesn't seem like anybody else is.
Big market for that these days.
There's not much of a, there's not a huge market for Syrah, but I think that California Syrah is beautiful. I think there's a few of our peers who do it particularly well. It's interesting. I think that I don't know how to answer your question directly though, because I just think that to some people, the more traditional varieties could act as that gateway. And I think that they do for, folks that are older than I am. I think about I'm always thinking about like my mom and her friends kind of as like a litmus test for the wines.
Okay.
She's lived in Sonoma Valley since the 70s. She's not a huge wine drinker, but her and her friends drink really traditional, conventional local wines. And they do not have a palate for my wines at all. And I think a lot about like, what would it take to make a wine that appeals to both my peer group and hers?
Okay.
And I don't know if that's how I want to believe it's possible.
Oh, it definitely is.
But it's challenging. And I think my goal with my wines, it's funny, like Alex, outed me a whole bunch by saying that I make natural wine, which is totally true. It's just something that
Sorry.
that's fine. It's just something I never really talk about with, in terms of how I market myself. Yes, I do make natural.
That's where you sell like 95% of
No,
your
for sure,
wine.
for sure.
So-
Listen, I do make natural wine. To me, the more important part of the conversation is the organic farming, and so that's what I always lead with.
How many of your mom's friends want to have that conversation though?
Organic farming,
Yeah.
some of them, yeah.
All right.
But going back to what you were saying though earlier. Oh, you totally got me off my track, man.
You're talking about trying to find Syrahs and Findel and writing your book, How Not to Make Money. And what were you talking about?
Oh my God. All right, table that one.
Well, you're talking about like how to connect with your mom's friends, like in terms of if you can make a wine that appeals to them and appeals to, like your philosophy of winemaking and how really like organic viticulture is the basis of the conversation that you want to have.
Totally. And I think too, like, I refuse to weigh in on what is and what is not natural wine. The only thing I will weigh in on is if you're not using organic grapes, it's not natural wine.
Yeah, I mean, I think the what is and isn't natural wine conversation, A, it's played out, B, it's kind of myopic at this point. I think the big question is like, how do, like, I think things that natural wine can't do, like real natural wine, is like replicate the extremely processed flavor profile that unfortunately our industry has hooked people on. No, it's the Casman, it's the Bang Bang, yeah. Sorry, I poured you guys the other. We're having a Chardonnay showdown. So 2020, also 2022, same vintage as Las Vivas. This is from Casmet Vineyard in Redwood Valley. So this is an older vine planting from the 60s. Neil and Leela, really cool people, been farming this property and living on it since the 80s, where there was like that moment where there was like a huge back to the land kind of like movement up in Mendocino County when I think land was probably incredibly affordable up there. And yeah, pretty simple stuff. Just direct press, high quality, old vine, organically farmed Chardonnay.
Yeah.
We actually haven't released this wine yet, but it's pretty interesting juxtaposition from. I mean, I think like so when people are like California Chardonnay, I'm like, that is like the broadest category in the world. I mean, forget about going as far south as like St. Lucia Highlands or Santa Barbara or Monterey. Like these are both North Coast Chardonnays that are, let's say, as the crow flies, maybe. Well, I guess it's kind of far.
100 miles.
Yeah, like 70, whatever, 100 miles. But like, they're pretty radically different wines. They're not even that different, like, in terms of climate. I mean Redwood Valley is probably
they're
quite a bit hotter.
super
but,
different.
Like, well, I mean, Redwood Valley is quite a bit hotter, right? But it's like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not like this is like Sonoma Coast wine. It's not like
No, it's in Sonoma Valley. It's an interior valley.
yeah,
It's more coastal adjacent.
yeah.
To me, my experience with Redwood Valley is their daytime highs during the summer.
It's super hot. Yeah,
It's scorching, but
it still cools down at night.
They do have a very large and regular diurnal temperature shift. They're not getting as much maritime influence. There's not fog, like in Sonoma Valley. There's fog coming in and out pretty much daily, except for during the heat waves. The one thing that I will give to Redwood Valley though, in terms of why I personally believe that it's able to retain acidity, even though I believe it's a pretty warm place to grow grapes, is it gets hotter there way later, and it gets colder there way earlier in the fall.
Okay.
But the most impressive thing to me about drinking this wine is that this wine was probably picked in terms of ripeness in a similar place to where my Sonoma Mountain Chardonnay was picked, but this wine is so lean, so a hotter climate and a more lean flavor profile is definitely something to meditate on.
What do you guys want to taste? Because we have too many wines open. So,
You want to go straight to the big reds?
well, I don't know. I don't think we can taste all the wines we have open. So, let's just go to
Yeah, we
red.
don't need to. Yeah, that's fine.
What you want to do? Pinot, Merlot? What do you want?
Let's pull out the Mount. Let's pull out the Mount Cadet, man.
Well, I thought we were going to stick on like really normie cepage here. Here,
Well,
you
well-
can do normie cepage. I'll do. Or you do esoteric cepage.
Yeah,
I'll
we're gonna
do
super
normie
freak you with
cepage. Well, but no, and I think the combo around like this moment being, I think like what I was trying to say before, I didn't really finish the thought, is like the things that we can't replicate are the extremely like industrial commercial flavors that are just fake. But the rest of it, like obviously it's hard to nail every single time having wines that are like super clean, low volatile acidity, you know, perfectly clarified, et cetera, if you're using like native yeast and you're not like filtering wine. And
Right.
I mean, obviously those are kind of like the main two things, or adjusting chemistry. Sorry, the dog's trying to get on the couch.
that's fine.
Come on, get up here. Come on, get up. Get up.
Take your time.
All right. The dog is
you
on
kind
the
of
couch.
have to. You kind of have to nail it each time. Though,
Yeah,
if you're-
I
if
mean,
you're
and
going
you
to
can
do
get
that.
totally clean wines often, right? If you're doing a good job and like the farming is good and your cellar's clean and you're dialed in on the winemaking, but you can't really replicate the flavor of new oak without new oak. You certainly can't start replicating some of the like insane viscosity that some of those wines have that people are fucking hooked on without like adjuncts and sugar, which obviously then you need like all sorts of stabilizers. And that's part of the issue, right? Is like some people, like the super mainstream consumer, has lost their taste or maybe never even had it for like what real things taste like, because we're all addicted to like insane amounts of sugar and salt and sort of like processed food and processed beverage. And so,
Yeah.
and it extends into wine, right? Like if people think that like the Prisoner is what a California red blend tastes like, they're just never gonna like any California red, and that's all they want. Like they're just never gonna like anything that could be deemed natural wine adjacent red blend, because you just can't replicate that within any normal confines of making natural wine.
To add on to, you know, that same thread, you know, I again, like my path to wine was more through the farm to table movement of organic farming. And you know, the best part of organic farming, you know, to me was the amazing meals that we made, and shared. And I mean, like being in college in Santa Cruz, the most lit party was the potluck.
What happens at the potluck?
Everybody went to the farmer's market.
Well, I mean, I know what
and made beautiful foods, and you know, I'm going to focus on that part of that conversation. But that was something that when I first discovered natural wine became really appealing to me, because we were really interested in, you know, like in pure foods and raw foods. And I mean, like, you know, if I was drinking raw milk and I wanted to eat sauerkraut, and everyone wanted the most minimally processed, if not zero amount of process in the food. And the whole, like, it was always interesting to me that people, you know, like to me, the most important part of the winemaking process is the organic farming. But there were a lot of beautifully farmed grapes grown throughout the world that are then taken into the cellar and either manipulated or have a lot added to them. And it's to this day, I still find it fascinating that there is a whole consumer base that is very into pure raw foods, but isn't as concerned about wines with additives in it.
big time. Big time. The old this is probably like, I don't know really how to date it. Maybe it was somewhere within the last like 10 years. Eric Asimov wrote the article that was titled Wine is Food. And it was like, I think that the title was literally like, Wine is Food. Repeat after me. Wine is food. And it's like, it's such a good point. And I used to notice this more than I notice it now. But yeah, like the amount of people that would come to Sonoma Valley and they would want to eat like the amazing local food and drink wines that, let's say, don't align with those same values was pretty astonishing. And it is hard to get that consumer off. I don't know, something about like beverage is just different. And I also think it's partially because people feel like they can trust their taste in food more than they can trust their taste in wine. Like fewer people are intimidated to talk about food. I mean, barring like really esoteric, like haute cuisine type stuff, than they are to talk about wine, right? Like a lot of people even are, like you're a good home cook and you can kind of like navigate a restaurant menu, but you're not gonna feel confident talking about wine. And so maybe that's part of what it is, because like that commercial style, it's easy to put in a box and be like, this is what a Chardonnay is. It's like big, it's buttery, it's rich. This is what a Cabernet is. It's oaky and black fruited.
Yeah, I think it ties a little bit into what you were saying earlier, though, too, with like European wines, maybe on like a super hyper local tasting menu, where it's like, okay, tomatoes from 15 miles away, lettuce is from just over the hill, everything so close.
Yeah.
Wine from 4,000 miles
Totally.
away.
Well, and there's a lot. I mean, this is kind of adjacent to that thought. Was like, I've also heard so many people say, and I still hear people repeat this, and it drives me insane. Even people who I know spend crazy amounts of money eating and drinking still think that like, oh, if I drink European wines, I get like less of a hangover because there's fewer additives. And I'm like, there's nothing inherent about European wines. It's just like probably self-selecting, because you're probably spending more money on European wines and you're buying like really nice Burgundy that's probably not super fucked with. It's like, yeah, you're like drinking DRC. It's like, yeah, it's good shit. I mean, I've never really experienced a whole lot of it, but it's like, but then when you're buying California wine, you're like spending $12.99 at Costco to just like pour some shit at your pool. It's like, well, you're not really comparing apples to apples here, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's like, yeah, you buy a $30 bottle of natural European wine at a wine store, and you buy a $30 bottle of California natural wine at a wine store. You're nothing about either of those wines will affect your body differently, really. But that is a common refrain, where they're like, oh, I went to Italy and I could just like drink all day long and never get drunk or hungover. I'm like, maybe that's just because you weren't stressed and you're just hanging out by a pool all day. Like,
You got to sleep in.
yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Like, this is placebo.
Yeah. Tell me about the Mountain Cuvée.
Yeah, so
It's David's most hipster wine. It is.
thus far,
The bar is low. It's Pinot, Chardonnay, Cabernet Merlot, and hipster wine.
Thus far, all of my other wines are single vineyard, single variety. This is the only blended wine that I make. It's Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. I actually kind of got the inspiration from this wine when I was doing a tasting up at Hayu with Nate Reddy. I've always been a huge fan of those wines. I feel like when they're the best examples, or some of the best examples of natural wine that I've ever had from the West Coast of the United States. And Nate pulled out this wine that was 75% Pinot Noir and 25% Pinot Gris. And I'm like, in theory, I'm like, this sounds so cool. And I had it, and no offense to Nate, I wasn't very impressed by the wine.
Whoa, burning Nate on the
It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It didn't do much for me.
Yeah.
And I just I had an idea. I'm like, I think it would be way better if it was more like 75% Pinot Gris and 25% Pinot Noir, which was just an idea I was toying with. And I have a acre of Pinot Noir with a few rows of Chardonnay in it. And then there's another neighboring Chardonnay block that's micro up on those Sonoma Mountain properties. Most of those Sonoma Mountain vineyards that I farm are all like kind of like 2 to 3 acre hobby vineyards in like a pretty wealthy gated community, which is where I got started. And and then I came across some Pinot Gris and a new vineyard that I picked up there, and I just decided to get freaky with it and throw it all together. Alex definitely encouraged me on that. Alex is the king of the esoteric field blend.
we were on co-ferments before there was hype around it. Let's say that.
Yeah. And to be honest, it was a happy mistake. This wine turned out way better than I expected. I expected it to be good, but this is my best selling wine, and I find this wine to be super approachable. To me, I think this wine is a crowd pleaser with the exception of my mom and her friends.
Okay. Still can't get that. Oh, damn.
I just think that people of her age group, and I'm not going to name any particular ages because I don't want to be exclusionary here. I just think that, some people who are used to drinking 15% red wine, mostly 15% red wine, have never had a red white blend that, is like around 12.5%. And it's just too weird for them.
Right. You kind of see through it a little bit.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think this general category came up around the natural wine movement, similar to orange wine. And it's also now conflated with the natural wine movement because people think like, anytime you have orange wine, it's natural wine. Anytime you have a chilled red, it's natural wine. And like obviously one thing has nothing to do with the other, but the natural wine movement, I think, certainly laid the groundwork for the entire market of orange wine and let's say like co-fermented red and white or co-fermented different fruits or just chilled red in general, which is weird because it's such a, I mean, it's not like there's nothing inherently niche about it. It's like light red wine chilled tastes fucking great. I don't know why it's like such
especially when you're next to a pool.
Yeah, a pool or anything, right? Like even as just like an aperitif or even just with lighter fare. I mean, it's just that is one of those things that does feel more uniquely American, where it's like if you told a 60-year-old Frenchman, like, we're going to have like a chilled bottle of wine, they'd be like, oh, is it like Beaujolais or Jura? Or if you told like the average 60-year-old American guy, like, we're going to have a chilled bottle of red wine with this, whatever, roast chicken, salmon, they'd be like, what? They'd be like, oh, Beaujolais Nouveau? That's like the only light red wine I've ever heard of. Georges Duboff.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
I think,
off topic.
I think though 25 years ago, there probably, I'm having a hard time thinking of too many examples of American-made red wines, light red wines that kind of fit that style, like a Heights Granulino or something.
Those wines are cool.
But, you know, I mean, I don't know. There's not too many other ones that
Certainly not.
pop off the top of my head.
Yeah. But it's such a good category, and it's, I mean, we make a lot of light red wine in every single possible variation.
And a lot of kitchen sink field blends, which are I don't want to speak for Alex, but the result of co-fermenting whole vineyards together.
Yeah. It's not like arbitrary stuff. I mean, it all started with Sunhawk, which was actually, you brought up Kevin Kelly earlier. It started with Sunhawk, which is a vineyard in Hopland it's an 8-acre vineyard with 10 grapes planted on it, and it's 6 red varieties and 4 white varieties. And it was just kind of like seemingly the only sensible thing to do with it. And of course, like co-fermenting field blends is such kind of like a throwback ancient winemaking practice before like commercialization and needing to be like, okay, we're going to sell this as a Zinfandel, we're going to sell this as a Cabernet, because those are like brand things that people recognize. Yeah, you would just like pick your field and throw it into fermenter and make the wine. And that was kind of a pretty early thing that we did with a fair amount of success and a fair amount of regularity early on. This is a pretty crazy wine. It's Zinfandel, but it's, I think, really not what people think of when they think of California Zinfandel. Unlike when we were tasting that Indian Springs Zinfandel earlier, that I think is more like classically warmer climate California Zinfandel. This is pretty interesting. This was a planting from 1870. It's all like own rooted vines from the original planting. David's been out there a bunch. It's on the Mendocino coast between Yorkville and Gualala. You can see clear out.
Really treacherous mountain road that connects the Anderson Valley essentially to the coast.
Okay.
Most of it's a dirt road, lots of switchbacks. It's probably only a 20-30 mile stretch. It takes 90 minutes, I think, to drive the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. I mean, you can see right out to the ocean. You're very close to the ocean as the,
On the
as the
ridge
crow
line,
flies.
20 miles above the Pacific Ocean. It's pretty impressive sight.
How'd you come across the vineyard when you're working for Gilset or
Jason Charles, I think, actually. Oh, no, not through Jason Charles. Through John Upton, who is a grower that we've been working with for a long time in Redwood Valley. He knows this guy, Sean Capucci, who's the owner of this vineyard, because their day jobs are in the trucking industry. And they work together. And Sean's a young guy, like a little bit younger than David and myself. And he was seeking some advice on how to farm his vineyard from John Upton, who's been growing grapes for like, I don't know, 40 years or something. And John was just like, hey, are you interested in 150-year-old vine, unrooted coastal Zinfandel? I'm like, how'd you know?
Yeah.
That sounds cool as hell.
Yeah.
And so, he put us in touch, and David and I went out there, and he was really looking for like some farming advice, and he was looking for someone to buy his grapes. And so David was chatting with him about the farming quite a bit, because it's about as unique of a site as you could imagine, right? It's like 150-year-old vines, pretty rare. Coastal, own root. It's just crazy vineyard, honestly. So we were like, okay, well, we're in for sure. And the first year we made the wine was 2020, and it never went dry, so we didn't bottle it. And then in 20, we ended up blending it and some other stuff. And then 21, which is the vintage of this wine, was killer. It's super unique. It's just like so aromatic. Like, having red wine this aromatic is, to me, incredibly appealing. Aromatic white wine, I think we all experience it pretty regularly, but I don't think aromatics in red is really talked about as much. And this is just like leaps out of the glass with all that like rose petal, white pepper. It's in a really nice spot now. It was extremely tannic when we first bottled it. Not that it's not tannic right now. It's also cool because this wine's like bulletproof. Like you can leave it open for a week and it's rock solid. But
I bet it's a hell of a story how that vineyard got planted in the first place.
well, this dude is like 5th generation. His family's owned it since, like the late 1800s. It's pretty wild. But yeah, I mean, do we have time for another taste?
Sure. Yeah.
What do you want to do?
Let's drink some Pinot.
Pinot?
I could grab the sequence.
Cool, thanks. Let's do Pinot and Cab, and then we'll wrap the tasting. The Cab is with the wax cap, yeah. We'll do Pinot first. Obviously, you got to keep it proper.
So I think it was 21. I I was still working with Dan Marioni, and I was looking to expand the amount of acres that we were farming. And I saw an ad on the wine business classifieds as
There you go.
just how many good stories start. And this guy out on Lakeville Highway, southern end of Lakeville Highway, close to Highway 37. So the southern end of both the town of Sonoma and the town of Petaluma. Was listed like 100+ acres of vineyard for lease. And I reached out to him and I said, well, I want to lease like 5 acres. Can I lease it? And he's like, this isn't how this, he's the vineyard is at the Sleepy Hollow Dairy, and Kip Herzog, who's now pushing 90, was born on the property, and his family has owned what was at one point a 650-acre ranch for 125+ years.
Yeah.
So I got a hold of Kip, and Kip's like, yeah, that's not really how this works, kid. And essentially Rodney Strong had just finished leasing the property, and as part of terminating their lease, they had to remove all the vines. And he was trying to get somebody to lease it and plant. The only part of the vineyard that was not removed was 10 acres of Pinot up on the hillside, because they needed a special permit in order to do the vineyard demolition because of the topography.
Okay.
The rest of the vineyard was down in the flats. So when I talked to Kip, he's like, well, there's no more, it's all gone. And he's like, well, I guess there's those 10 acres that they didn't rip out this year. Do you want to lease that? It was a little bit more than I wanted to do, or wasn't sure if I could do. But after going out there, I knew I had to figure it out. It's just such a breathtaking site. It's 2 miles from San Pablo Bay on the southern end of the Petaluma River. You get to stand up on the hillside and look out over the city skyline and the Bay Bridge, and I was sold. So this Pinot is from there. I started with those 10 acres, and then I started leasing another 12 acres from Kip on the hillside right below his house. And then the year after that is when I started managing the Griffin's Lair Vineyard. Griffin's Lair Vineyard's another neighboring property. And through working for Kip, the neighbor found me, which is really nice. So now Lakeville is where a little more than half of the acreage that I farm is. So it's half my acres are up on Sonoma Mountain, split between all those smaller hobby vineyards, and then down on Lakeville in South Petaluma, which is, more acres, but is exclusively Pinot. And that's what we're drinking now. This is a 50% full cluster from 22.
Yeah, really nice one.
Drinking great.
It's drinking great. This is a good, I feel like a good topic of conversation for the podcast too, and just kind of where my headspace is at. To this point, all the wines I've made have been with 0 sulfur added. And Pinot Noir has been the wine that has been the most difficult to accomplish in that style.
Okay.
After we bottled this wine, it was really fussy for a really long time. And I feel like it's really now just kind of coming around. And it's showing really nice. But it's also the only wine I feel like that I make that is not worth drinking on day 2. Gets really mousy after it's been open for a while. And with having this issue with the Pinot, I did a lot of, fun research of drinking as many California 00 Pinots as I could, and even some 00 Pinots from Burgundy. And my experience is that the wines really just don't, with very few exceptions, the wines don't really hold up well. Shout out to my good friend James Jelks, Flores Wines, who purchases some grapes for me. And also shout out to good friend Brent Mayu, Stagiaire Wine, who purchases some grapes for me. They both make very, very good, clean 00 Pinots. And I think that it's a pretty frustrating grape to work with this style. I didn't make any Pinot in 24. And I think if I ever make it again, I'll definitely add sulfur to it. It's a real pain in the ass to work with.
I mean, let's just let's be fair though. Like this wine is so good right now. This is like drinking great. I think part of like the magic of wine and winemaking and specifically natural wine, is that like wines go in different directions and different phases of their life, like people do, and like this wine was just kind of disjointed and not expressive for I guess like a year and change, and now
Yeah.
it's like it's. I mean, this wine's super pure. It's pretty amazing. I think this is really super top notch Pinot, and also to be fair, we were working with a pretty small sample size because you only made 2 vintages of Pinot, and the 23 was pretty lit like right off the bat, and so
Yeah, I mean, it's going through a fussy stage and bottle now.
yeah, but that wine was just like more if that wine was like more precise when we bottled it.
Listen, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. I also think too that my experience with 00 Pinot is that the wine, even the best examples, I think kind of fall apart after they've been open for a little while. And again, like with this idea of making wines that have appeal to people outside of just your typical natural wine consumer, making wines that have a broad, not necessarily mass appeal, but a broader appeal, like ideally appeal to a majority of people. I think it's a hard sell to sell a bottle of wine that has to be drank within the first few hours and likely will not be good if you open it the next day.
Yeah. So your
it's a-
mom's friends don't like this wine.
I haven't even brought it over there yet.
Of course they don't like this wine. But like that style of Pinot is like, I feel like this was a big talking point with California Pinot for a while. It was like that style of Pinot is like, it's like you push ripeness, you add as much Syrah as is legally allowable. You definitely fine it because you need to like take all of this grippy, harsh, crunchy mouthfeel out of it so that it's like lush and easy to drink. And, it's like, yeah, that's not when you can't make that style in the boundaries of anything that would be deemed natural wine. So it's like, yeah, sure. This wine would maybe be more stable on day 2 if it had 20 parts of sulfur in it, but this wine's pretty banging. So I don't know.
Yeah, do you find, I guess, a certain part of your production maybe is more likely to be that wine that kind of can catch on with maybe a more mainstream consumer, and then others remaining a little more niche or
I just think
kind of natural leaning?
I think by virtue of the profile of the wines, like with the Las Vivas wines, like I think the Cabernet, which we just bottled that is still unreleased, and the Chardonnay just have the most mass market appeal in terms of the style of the wine.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're very varietally correct, I would say.
Yeah. And I think to answer your question, Matt, I'm I might not be the most traditional person out there in the world, but I am actually chasing like a more traditional style for the wines that I'm making. I really, and again, like with being fascinated with economies of scale and business, I would like, it's a huge goal of mine to be, to make natural wine that appeals to people that aren't seeking out natural wine. I want to make natural wine that can be on a restaurant list or in a wine shop that doesn't exclusively focus on natural wine. And I think that my wines definitely fit into that category. I think that sulfuring some of them could get some of them closer to that. I really liked listening to what Evan Lewandowski said on one of your podcasts interviews, where he said that his goal is to always make the wine 00, and he will not hesitate to add sulfur I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, Evan, if I botched this. But that he wouldn't hesitate to add sulfur if that was what he deemed to be necessary for the success of the wine, but that he never loves them the same anymore after that. he always loves the zero sulfur wines more, and he acknowledged that it was kind of a mental block thing. But I think that for me, I really appreciated him or the way he articulated that, and I would argue that that will kind of be my approach going forward. The Cabernet that I just bottled, my 23 Cabernet, so I think it was 2/3 of it that got bottled was bottled 0.0, and I wanted to bottle 1/3 of it just to get a data point specifically for ageability. It spent 18 months in barrel. I'm going to give it at least 6 months in bottle before I release it. I anticipate it's a wine that I will be, I think it's a wine that's built to last, and I'm really interested to see how it ages over time. The two different, the one with sulfur and the one without. And I think that, again, like going forward, I'd love to continue to make wines without sulfur when possible, but I would like to figure out how to scale up my wine business at some point too.
Yeah, that'd be a fun experiment at, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years
Yeah.
for that wine, maybe longer. I'm sure it's got a long life
I mean, I think
ahead of it.
Yeah, and it's funny, and I feel like, again, like kind of like working in the reverse order of operations. It's been so long since I have experimented with adding sulfur to wines. Basically, for the last 10 years, I've made exclusively wines with no sulfur, either my own or the ones I was working on. And so now I want to get some more data points about what happens when you add sulfur to wine, because I'm honestly pretty ignorant.
I think the side by side is cool. That wine's like super stable, so I think it'll be like harder to even see the unsulfured wine go in any direction that you don't care for. But I think like in a world where you had like unlimited resources, doing a lot of the A/B testing where you can sulfur a certain section of a cuvee and not sulfur the rest of it, and then bottle them, treat them exactly the same way, bottle them at the same time, cellar them in the same place, and then check results over time would be super interesting. The problem is that most people who are interested in unsulfured wine don't have the time and the space and the resources to do a whole lot of that, but I think it's really cool.
It'll be interesting, even I think in maybe like 6 months, to see where they're at and to see if one is more ready to go at that point.
Well, I think
like
Even at bottling, we had an experience.
Yeah, the unsulfured wine just tastes like imminently more ready to drink than the sulfured wine. But you're also talking about like Sonoma Cabernet that is broad-shouldered and tannic, and I would imagine around 14% alcohol, and it's
It's
just
under 13.5.
really.
You proud?
I don't know. I'm shocked. I'm shocked you'll even touch this stuff, honestly. But it's like it's a structured wine.
Yeah.
So I think like those are the wines where you don't like where small sulfur additions like 20 parts become really apparent when the wine is young, because it's like low pH tannic wine, and you add 20 parts and it's like the whole thing's like super wound up and sucked in and just feels like so tight. Whereas like the unsulfured wine,
The fruit, the bigger thing for me was the fruit was just like so much more readily expressive. And
Yeah.
flavorful.
yeah, I mean, and the wine is also just like extremely clean and super structured and feels like relatively indestructible regardless to me.
To extend upon what Alex was saying, though, too, a lot of my most extensive, informative, like winemaking exposure was up at the Katuri Winery, and I spent a lot of time up there with Tony and tasted through a lot of Tony's wines, both newer vintages and stuff that had been in bottle and maybe not the best cellaring over time, that still showed really nicely. And like a lot of, I'm not going to say this about all of them, but there's a lot of Tony's wines that I've had that really stood up to the test of time. And that I've also never spent time in a more rustic winemaking facility. And I think that some of Tony's older wines are exceptionally gorgeous. And, I kind of got to see like from some of my more earlier formative exposure, how little he does and what is possible through, through that like hands-off style of winemaking. I would argue that what made those wines so great was the fruit that he was working with.
Well, and nothing's rushed, right? Like I think that's
Yes.
also like a
Yeah.
huge difference between the sort of like our generation of natural winemakers and like a guy like Tony, where we've all been sort of like in a hurry to get our businesses up and running and get out there, and we have different amounts of like financial and business pressure. And he's been at it for a super long time, and the benefit of not having the time pressure, I think, is pretty real for the wines.
Yeah, absolutely. But also I think that one of the things that I learned is that if you're going to make wines that don't have any sulfur added or have nothing done to them at all, I think that higher alcohol, fully extracted red wines are much more resilient than the styles of wine that a lot of, myself included, but that a lot of our peers are making. And so I think that, yes, like having more élevage and bottle time, or time in bottle before it's released, definitely makes the wine more stable. But, I've had plenty of Tony's wines that have plenty of RS in them. And RS can really be your enemy when you're making zero sulfur wines, because that's food for any kind of bacterial inoculum or anything that you don't want in there.
Yeah.
But it's also really hard to survive in that for those organisms and that high of alcohol.
Yeah, and they do tend to have, I guess, that kind of long élevage sitting in barrel for quite a while. And
The idea
I
of
guess
like
they can work things out in barrel, maybe.
Yeah, well, and also the idea of like micro-oxygenation, where it's had like a small amount of oxygen exposure over a long period of time. So then whenever the wine is moved or bottled or open, that it's had so much oxygen exposure over its life, ideally not oxidized, but enough oxygen exposure over its life that it doesn't get shocked when a cork is pulled.
Oh, and the last wine here. Yeah. This is
Cabernet.
Cabernet from
that's right.
Carneros, actually. So this is a vineyard that Leyloon farms, and it's on Burndale Road in Carneros. This is the 2022 vintage. This also not yet been released.
Sonoma side of Carneros.
Sonoma side of Carneros. So legit cool climate cab.
Yeah.
Kind of a rare bird, honestly. So we made this wine 18, 19. We didn't make it in 20. 18, 19, 21, 22. It's called Egomaniac, and it's just a pretty long maceration. It's about 6 weeks on the skins. I think for cab, again, like this vineyard typically getting picked pretty late about as late in the season as you can, like late October.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just, other than the long maceration, the rest of the winemaking is pretty normal. It's all destemmed, élevage in large format barrels. Kind of a unique look into North Coast Cabernet in a way, just like much more restrained than
Yeah.
what I think a lot of people would expect. It's drinking like very dried out.
But it has like a slightly raisin flavor.
It
But
really does.
the fruit though is super pretty though. It's very, very red fruited versus blue or black.
Yeah.
So how has the wine community changed since you got into it 10 years ago or so?
That's a good question. I mean, technically, I started working in wine in 2011.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a while. The wine community, like the industry.
Maybe specifically sort of your niche of the industry, like
Well, I mean,
low intervention wine.
I mean, I would say the first thing is there are just way more people in it, which is super exciting. There are more businesses involved. With that comes just like an insane amount of creativity kind of flooding the industry, more competition for the businesses in the industry, which I also don't think is a bad thing. I would say like one thing that's been pretty remarkable is when I first got into it, there were a lot of people, especially who hung around Ruby, who weren't really like in the wine industry, but they were extraordinarily knowledgeable about wine and super passionate and sort of were like industry adjacent friends, even though they had like day jobs that weren't in wine. Many of whom knew like as much or more about wine than the folks who actually worked in the business. But there's a lot more of that now.
Okay.
I would say just a lot of people who are super enthusiastic, like really passionate, super knowledgeable, absolute sponges for information. There are also a lot of people who I'd say more than there used to be. I mean, the last year to 2 years has been a little bit different just because the market has started to turn down. But before that, I would say one other thing is like there was so much moonlighting and sort of like second jobs in wine kind of thing. Like, yeah, I make, a few tons of wine on the side, have a little wine brand, but my day job's in XYZ. Or although there wasn't always some of this where like, yeah, I work at a wine shop on like Tuesday nights and I get like a discount in exchange or whatever, and I'm there to learn. And there's always been that, but I just think there's been so much more of it because there's just so much more interest in wine from our generation, despite what you read, which is all about like how there's this sort of like change in momentum and people are drinking less and all these things, which are true, right? But the flip side is previous generations like Gen X and baby boomers were not as interested in and knowledgeable about wine at our age as our generation is, right? Like millennials who are now like in their 30s and 40s know so much more about wine. And this is also self-selecting because I'm talking about like my friends basically, but like the level of knowledge and interest in wine amongst my friends who don't work in the business is pretty wild. And I'm not even talking about my friends here. Like some of it's just my friends from growing up who live on the East Coast who are just, they're really into it, I mean, maybe some of them aren't like, they're not like super nerdy experts, but they actually care about it. Like, they'll like text me and, oh, which wine should I order? Hey, like I just came across this wine. What do you think about it? And it's like, they're into it,
Yeah.
And I think that's super cool and super special. And I think even though there's this major market downturn and correction occurring right now, first of all, there's so much good wine out there that so many people are going to continue to be interested in wine just by virtue of the fact that like it tastes so damn good.
Yeah.
And we have so much access to so much good wine. And potentially like market forces will make some of it cheaper, although there's like all these crazy things happening with tariffs and the government. But I think just regardless of all of that, people of our generation are going to continue to love wine because there's just so much good wine out there, and we're exposed to so much of it. We have access to so much of it. We have access to all the information. We can get whatever we want. It's all at our fingertips all the time. And so whatever happens in this market downturn, market correction, that will always that's going to keep people hooked, I think.
Yeah. What's next for Subject to Change?
Yeah, that's a big question. What's next for Subject Change is kind of unclear. We're definitely in a period of majorly scaling back and trying to kind of like find a new strategy forward, because the scale that we were at is just not really workable in the current environment. So we're trying to actively figure all that out right now in terms of kind of like getting out of this winery space and trying to figure out what the future of the business is going to be in kind of the market that we live in versus the market that we were living in, which was like very hot. There was a lot of growth, and we like scaled up all this infrastructure that we can't really use anymore. And there's just a lot of uncertainty in this business right now. Like, as much as I was just saying that on the consumer side, it's great, but on the business side, it's hard. It's a really hard time. It's hard to know what's next. It's hard to know like how long the timelines of these different like periods of the market correction are going to be. And so I think frankly, a lot of people are just kind of hanging on right now to see what happens next with a lot of things, right? Like, part of that's industry wide with tariffs, because so much of the industry relies on imported wine. Even though we make domestic wine, we still sell wine to distributors and wine shops and wine bars and restaurants that a ton of their business relies upon these imported wines. So they will be impacted financially, and then we will therefore be impacted financially, at least in the short term. And yeah, I think a lot of this is just kind of waiting for some of the oversupply to flush out of the system. There is a global oversupply of wine. It is undeniable. Wine is a really challenging business for a number of reasons, some of which have to do with like our deep reliance on nature. But a lot of which, from like a more kind of like cut and dry business perspective, is just like there's really long timelines. And so you have to kind of like project out your, the decisions you're making about the wine to make this year are not really playing out for 2 to 3 years from now, let's say, in a lot of cases. And so in terms of like, you're contracting grapes, and then you're buying the grapes, and then you're, incurring all of the expenses to crush the grapes, and, you're keeping it in élevage, and then you're incurring bottling expenses, and then you're incurring storage expenses of your bottles, and then you do some bottle aging, and then you finally release the wine, and then the wine, unless you've made like a tiny amount of wine or you're a very famous winemaker, might be for sale for 6 to 12 months, from the time you release it until you sell out of it. And so it's a really hard business, like financially. So I think a lot of people are just trying to figure out how to manage that. And they're, during the periods of growth, which were basically endless, like from the great financial crisis until now, or until, let's say, like early 23, when things started to seemingly level off and then taper off, and then experiencing negative growth. We were making all these decisions about growth, during periods where we couldn't even make enough wine. And so, and everybody was. And so, yeah, there's a massive amount of wine that needs to get flushed through the system, bulk wine, package wine, etc. And yeah, a lot of businesses are getting like really badly hurt during this time, and scary. And hopefully people can continue to support each other and just kind of like do the best we can to shoulder this moment.
Yeah.
I will not forget this time.
You know,
Yeah.
I think a great thing that Alex just brought up is the amount of overhead that goes into all of this. It's really hard to even on a small scale to keep your overhead low. And as you scale, the margins on your overhead gets better, so like, whether you're warehousing or, whether, your cost per ton, if you have your own facility, the larger your facility, the more equipment you have, like you're getting better margins on it, but your overhead's still growing. So you have to keep the revenue going, and you got to feed the beast.
Yeah.
And when sales dry up and your overhead's high, what do you do? And, I actually haven't spent hardly any time talking about farming in this conversation at all. But to turn this on, back towards farming, there's a lot of overhead in farming as well. I have a whole fleet of tractors that are really thirsty for diesel and that require constant maintenance. A fleet of trucks and trailers. And I also have 10 full-time employees. It all adds up really fast, especially when you start talking about just the cost of doing business in California with insurance, compliance, and all of those other things. So on my end, what's happening right now is having started my business through taking out leases on vineyards was really my way of sticking my foot in the door and really saying like, hey, I want to play too. I didn't have enough machines and I didn't have enough people to offer traditional vineyard management services like the bigger companies do. But now I do. And these leases have just become riskier. I can only lease a vineyard if I can sell the grapes. And I was really lucky to get started in this business when there was an undersupply of grapes and a lot of demand. It was a great time to get started, but that meal ticket is ended.
Yeah.
I've had 50 tons of canceled contracts in the last year, at least. So I've already given up leasing 12 acres, and I'm just in general gonna get out of leasing vineyards. Even when I cancel the grapes because my liability is too high, I take out a huge annual operating loan and of several $100,000 every year that needs to be paid back within 1 year. Traditional farm loans. They give you money to farm, you sell your crop, you pay off your loan, and you see what's left afterwards. And there's just too much risk involved, especially right now with such a volatile market. Luckily in 2024, I was one of the lucky ones. I was able to sell all of the grapes that I grew, but I sold way too many of them at half price, and it hurt, man.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna unfortunately do the thing. I'm going to start doing the thing that I was resistant to doing for so long, and now I'm questioning why I was resistant to doing it. I'm just going to farm other people's vineyards for money. It's a great business model. That's why everybody else does it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the custom crush of farming, basically.
Essentially, and
Just utilizing your infrastructure for things other people will pay for.
Absolutely. And I'm not, I'm no sage. But I don't think that the wine sales and just the wine industry as a whole is going to rebound quickly. I think that this is going to be at least a medium-term trend. Clearly it will rebound. There's always been cycles of boom and bust in all aspects of the economy, including wine. But as Alex was saying, like there was a boom moment in the whole wine industry for the last few years, and especially in natural wine, it was an underexploited part of the industry, and now it's saturated. There is not a saturation of vineyard management companies. Most of these vineyard management companies are operated by a bunch of older men who are trying to get out of the business.
Okay.
And there's not nearly enough young people starting businesses that are trying to replace them.
Okay.
So whether I'm right or wrong, I at least feel that there is a great opportunity to start a business farming grapes, because I personally see that demand will only increase over time as there is a shortage of supply for people that offer these services.
Yeah, it seems like you have maybe that niche too of like organic and high quality farming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm going to continue to struggle with, at least in the near term future, is that I can't do things as timely of way as the bigger companies.
Okay.
They have way that, like, I have a small fleet of vehicles and machines. They have massive fleets of vehicles and machines, and so either 100 or several hundred employees, and they can get work done on a schedule, to a T. Whereas the way I market myself is that I may not get things done in as timely a manner as the property owners have come to expect through their previous vineyard management relationships, but I can offer a more personalized experience. The other companies are really large and they don't always do as much work with customer relations, and that's kind of where I'm trying to exploit my niche in terms of not only offering a higher quality service for a competitive price, but just being willing to answer their calls and their questions instead of ignoring them, especially when they're spending really good money, which is
Yeah.
kind of like the MO for a lot of the bigger companies, is that they're non-responsive to, a 20-acre client for me is a great client, and that's a big client. For the bigger companies, that's a nobody client.
Right. Yeah, find your niche in the big larger scheme of things.
Totally.
Yeah. Is there anything we missed, or you guys want to talk about that we glanced over or missed or anything?
Not really.
The only thing I want to
really.
add is I really want to shout out the shared tasting room that I'm a part of.
Yeah, that's a great place.
I think it was last August. Dose Bar on the Sonoma Plaza opened, and it is a shared tasting room with 6 brands. It's myself, Fresco Wines, Dan Marioni Wines, Atella Wines, Caleb Leisure, North American Press. I really hope I'm not forgetting anybody. That was 6, right? And something that I've been hearing since I moved back to Sonoma in 2017 is that, when people come up to wine country to go tasting, there aren't really any opportunities to taste natural wine. And it's, again, really, it takes a lot of overhead to run a tasting room on the downtown Sonoma Plaza. And we have all pooled our resources together to make this happen. And we're all really proud of it. And it's just a fun opportunity to get out of the city and make a day out of coming up to Sonoma and hang out at the Dose Bar. And I hope to see you all there.
Well, if we're just plugging, I would also say that my partner Dominique and I run a wine bar and a wine shop, Gemini Bottle and Bar Gemini in San Francisco, where we can take care of all of your natural wine needs.
Yeah,
And even fill your pantry.
And fill your pantry and fill your belly at the bar and spirits at the shop. And yeah, I would say just like one final thought is I think that I imagine people who listen to your podcast are primarily people who work in the industry and who are wine enthusiasts and not like necessarily super casual wine consumers. So I would say just in general, this community supports each other a lot, and I think that it's really important that people kind of continue to support each other and can help educate consumers on sort of how to help small businesses survive through a time that is, I think, pretty clearly going to be marked by like businesses going out of business, consolidation. I mean, even if there even is consolidation, right? Because like tons of these big brands are trying to get rid of their wine brands, like the whole Constellation thing,
Yeah.
et cetera. And so,
Get him out of here.
yeah, but it's like we have to be left in a climate where small businesses can afford to survive, right?
Yeah.
And so, like in San Francisco, for example, or in Sonoma, like places where doing business is super expensive. I think like continued support from consumers, especially for California wineries, domestic wineries, like we put on with Brent from Stagiaire, Wine from Here 2 years in a row,
Yeah.
which was a festival that we hosted here at the winery and Subject to Change. And that was just about like kind of celebrating domestic natural wine. And it was really inspiring, like really inspiring to see just the amount of extremely awesome wines that are being made, really inspiring to see how enthusiastically consumers came out for it. And it is really my hope that we can kind of continue to keep momentum and enthusiasm and kind of like money flowing into these businesses so that whatever is on the other side of this period of instability is like a climate where small businesses can remain, an important part of the fabric, because I don't know that big companies will really ever be able to make products like this that matter in the same way. Maybe one day, but for now, I think if you like natural wine and you like small production wine, continue to try to like buy locally and support small businesses as much as you possibly can, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't.
California producers.
I also want to thank you a lot for doing what you do. This podcast is extremely informative. I listen to it regularly. You have great guests on. You're a really good interviewer. And there's a lot of content here that I think people were thirsty for. And so thanks for having us on and coming out here and spending all this time with us today. And thanks for producing awesome content. I know that this isn't like paying your bills and stuff. So,
No.
like,
Goes the other way, really.
I know, but this is like a
Custody
legit
bills.
freaking service that you're providing to wine consumers and people in the wine industry. Like, I'm friends with tons of the people that you've had on your podcast, but just like listening to them get interviewed for 2 and 3 hours at a time, like I'm learning things about those folks who I've known for, a decade plus in certain cases that I've never known before. And listening, because when I hang out to them, I'm not just sitting there like, tell me your story. Like we're just hanging out and we're chit chatting and whatever. And like, so it's really cool it's a really cool format. I mean, I listen to a ton of podcasts, but like most of the podcasts I listen to, I don't know a lot of the people on it, and I don't have like such close context to what's being discussed. And so again, it's like, yeah, I see Evan Lewandowski pretty regularly and we hang and we chat, but it's like, yeah, I've never heard him just like talk for 2 hours extemporaneously about like his life and his business and his thoughts on these things. And I think it's really awesome. So, shout out to you and the Indie Wine Podcast
Thanks.
for doing
Appreciate
this.
it.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Like,
Thanks for listening today. David and Alex are both hard at work farming, producing, and selling natural wines. It's a tough business out there. Both are bringing great philosophies and points of view to the wine world. And above all, the wines are tasting great. You can find Alex's wines at subjecttochange.wine.com and follow him on Instagram at subjecttochangewineco or bargeminisf. And David you can follow at Las Vivas Wine or find his wines at lasvivaswines.com. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. Feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses like gas money, podcast hosting, research websites, and books, and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.